I feel like everyone who paints goblins and squigs are always having a good time, and I want in on the action. So today I'm going to paint up my favourite goblin and squig from Warhammer Fantasy. Now lately I found myself being a bit envious of people who paint goblins because it looks like they're having so much fun. Now after completing a pretty big batch paint, I thought it was time to treat myself and paint a single mini, well 2 single minis. And they are Gobbla and Skarsnik, the original classic versions of these 2 models. Now these guys have a bit of spunk, so I want to keep them as loud and vibrant as possible, but also try and maintain that old Hammer Warhammer feel. I'm going to take some inspiration from the original art, but pump up the vibrancy just a little bit. Now before we get into painting these 2 amazing minis, I've got some pretty big news for the channel. We finally have our very own Patreon. Yay! So if you want to support the channel, make sure you click on the Patreon link in the bio and head on over and sign up. But I'll give you some more details about that at the end of the video. So let's get into it. So I removed the mold lines and based these guys up and gave them a black prime, but I feel like I made a bit of a mistake because I actually wanted the squig to be really vibrant, so I should have given it a white primer, but that doesn't really matter. I slapped on a couple thin coats of white paint over the top of this and it'll work out fine. Now, as I said, I want this angry, veiny meatball to really stand out, so I slapped on a couple thin coats of Evil Sunz Scarlet. I recently tried using Vallejo Bloody Red on a test mini to see if it was similar to Evil Sunz, but it was just a little bit more dull and didn't cover as well, so if you're after a really vibrant red for a base, go with Evil Sunz. Next, I throw on a couple layers of 3/4 Warpstone Glow to 1/4 Dark Green by Vallejo, all over the worm-like tail and the big tongue, just being careful not to try cover the teeth so much. I give those large gums a good coat of Emperor's Children, which is one of my favourite colours, and then I use Genestealer Purple on his large bottom lip and those fat bags under his eyes. At this point I realised it was probably better for me not to paint the teeth and the horns just yet because it was going to be a bit of a nightmare to paint that green tongue. So I'll carry on and do those later. Let's throw on some washes, and I use Flesh Tearers Red all over the Evil Sunz, and I like to water this down slightly because this can be pretty potent. Now the next one is a bit of a weird step, but I like to throw on some watered down Doomfire Magenta all over the pink gums. This will just pump up the vibrancy a little bit. Then I apply some Magos Purple all over the lips and the eye bags. At this point I was feeling pretty good about how it was going, but I was worried it was a bit messy and dull, but like always, just stick the course. So once I get these highlights on, I think I'll feel a bit better about this guy. Now I'm going to start highlighting the green first. As you can see, those teeth are in the way. I carefully go over the large sections of the tail and the tongue with Warpstone Glow, and then mix in small amounts of Moot Green. To finish, I do a skinny edge highlight of each section of the tail with Moot Green, and just a small amount on the tongue. And now that's finally done, I go over each tusk, horn, tooth and claw with some Carrick Stone, and then hit them with some extremely watered down Skeleton Horde. It's good to wash this down a fair bit because like all washes it can be a bit overpowering. I remember first starting out painting and using them straight out of the pot, and I'd always wonder why my minis look so messy, and it was because I didn't water down my contrast paints. So the moral of the story is make sure you water them down, but I guess you all know that. And so after this, I quickly throw on some gunmetal over the tooth cap and the chain. It's funny how in the old world, squigs have a dental plan. Alright, now let's highlight this red rage ball, and I roughly go back over the washed areas with some Evil Sunz, and I'm not too fussed if it's a little messy. I just want to make sure the red is bright on the larger raised areas. I then apply a smaller highlight of Wild Rider Red, all over, but just a bit more carefully. I go over the nose, brows, around the top lip, and also over the warts, veins, feet, and raised areas of the skin. I wasn't feeling that punch of colour just yet, so I mixed in a small amount of Troll Slayer Orange to the Wild Rider Red, and just went back over a smaller area. And to finish this raging red round boy, I mix half Orange Flare by 2 thin coats and some Uriel Yellow for a final stark highlight to help seal the deal. Now this was very much an experiment, and I'm very happy with how this turned out. I hit the eyeball with a coat of Uriel Yellow, and then put 50-50 Uriel Yellow and Dawn Yellow to the front of the eye. Then I use some Abaddon Black and just dot that on for the eyeball. Now I really love pink, it's one of my favourite colours to paint, so I'm always really happy when I get to use it for a mini. I go back over the gums with Emperor's Children, being careful not to get any in the recesses. I then mix in small amounts of Flayed One Flesh to the Emperor's Children, and just highlight that up a few times until I'm happy. For the lips and the eye bags, I use the same technique by mixing in small amounts of Flayed One Flesh to Genestealer Purple, and just go back over with some rough strokes to give the lips some texture and cracks. Time for the horns, teeth and the tusks, and if you've seen my old Chorflord video or my Black Orc video, you know what I'm going to do now, so I'll keep this pretty quick. I like the look of my horns and tusks and things like that to be kind of worn and look like they've been damaged and stuff. So I developed this technique while looking at a real life photo of a rhino horn. I feel like looking at real images and stuff like that and then trying to figure out how to paint them is a really fun and kind of creative way to approach painting. Using a large brush, I glaze Carrick stone towards the end of each horn, tusk, tooth and nail. I like to take my time with glazing and I do a few watered down coats just to build it up. I then do a rough coat of watered down Abaddon black and Stonewall grey. I only mix in a tiny bit of Stonewall grey to this mix just to make it a very dark grey. I then turn this into a glaze and start glazing upwards. I then glaze Carrick stone from the opposite direction, making sure not to get any on the lower parts of the tusk and the horns. And once I'm happy with this, I'll add some super skinny lines of bone white. And then I add tiny nicks of black to each tusk and a small white line underneath just to emulate some scratches. I really think this gives the model's horns and tusks a nice point of interest. Now that's my first ever squig finish. Stick around to the end to see the reveal, but if you could hit the like and the subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, let's move on to Skarsnik. And I think I'm going to keep the black base coat this time, but I'm going to paint it a little bit differently. I'm going to paint each color from start to finish instead of doing my usual base, wash, highlight approach that I usually do. Now just like on the green tail of Gobbla, I mix up a small amount of dark green to a larger amount of warpstone glow and apply a couple coats of this onto the face and the hands. I then use pure warpstone glow and add small amounts of moot green just to build these layers up. As some of you know, I've always struggled with painting the colour green. It was something that I've worked really hard to improve on. I would say if you struggle with something, don't shy away from it. Keep practicing and eventually it will just click, and it might even become something you really enjoy doing. For this gobbo's eyes, I dab on some Evil Suns, then some Wild Rider Red, and finish off with a bright dot of Uriel Yellow. I hit each tooth and the large number of skulls on the mini with some Carrick stone. I actually didn't realise how many skulls were on this guy until I took a closer look, but you know what? The more skulls the better. I love painting skulls. I then highlight the teeth with a mix of bone white and Carrick stone and just do a final highlight of bone white to the tips. I hit the rest of the skulls with some watered down skeleton horde and then highlight with Carrick stone and bone white just like I did with the teeth. So far so good, but I wanted these two minis to tie together as they are a pair, so what I'll do is add some more red features on Skarsnik. Now I've seen a few cool goblins about, and I always think they look good with the highlight of red here and there, so I give the weird hairy belt and horns a coat of 3 parts Evil Suns to 1 part corn red, and then I just give the hairy belt a wash of fleshed hair as red, making sure it pulls in all the recesses. I hit the top 3/4 of the horns with pure Evil Suns, and then go over each strand of hair with Evil Suns as well. Next up is a smaller highlight of Wild Rider Red, making sure I don't get any in the recesses, and then a final highlight of 2 thin coats Orange Flare. I also do a spot highlight on the tips of the horns with some Uriel Yellow just to make those suckers look hot. Time for a bit of leather action, and I go over the little shoes, pouch, knife sheath with Doombull Brown. Then I hit them all again with watered down wash of Agrax Earthshade. I go back over with Doombull Brown and then add small amounts of Scrag Brown to this and build up that Scrag Brown until I'm happy. I make sure I apply this to the raised areas or the corners of each object. To wrap these leathers up, I just use a thin highlight of Zemesi Desert to finish. Now there's a lot of red and black, so to make this little guy more fun, I give his sack a coat of Teclis Blue, a wash of Ultramarine Blue over this, and then some highlights of Lothern Blue, just mixing in some blue horror to build up. I've seen a lot of different ways to do black highlights, and I was going to do something different, but I was feeling so good about this guy that I didn't really want to stuff him up, so I went with my old method, so I'll keep this really quick for you all. I go over each fold and corner of the robe with Dark Reaper, then some Thunderhawk Blue, and a final highlight of Rust Grey. I also did a small dot highlight in some areas with blue horror when I finished. I also threw these colours on the staff in a swirling motion to try and make it look a little more magic, I guess. I don't know if it worked, but I like it. And now it's time for some true metallics, and I put down some gunmetal over his daggers and spear parts of the staff, some Liberator gold on the daggers, rings and his little bracelet. I then throw a wash of Gulliman flesh over these little gold bits, and I water down some black and kind of glaze it and pull it on the sides of the dagger. I do this a couple times until the black builds up, and then I glaze silver from the opposite direction, and to finish up I use an edge highlight of half white, half silver all around the dagger and the spear tips. For the gold, I just go over each little bit with an overbrush technique, which is kind of like dry brushing but not as severe, with some polished gold, and then I finish off with a mix of polished gold and silver for that final highlight. Alright, time for the yellows, and if you saw my video last week of my Avaland archers, you'll be pretty across this, and if you haven't, make sure you check out that video after this one. So the original artwork has these cool little triangles on his collar and also these badass flames on the bottom of his cloak. And you know me, I'm not going to back away from a challenge, so I'm definitely going to throw these features on this guy as well. Using bronze flesh tone and a skinny brush, I carefully draw as best as I can little triangles on the collar and some flames on the bottom of the robes. Each flame I draw is like a big stretched S. I also use bronze flesh tone for a base color on all the other yellow parts and then give it a wash with some Seraphim sepia, and then I highlight with Uriel yellow and Dawn yellow. I get a few people asking me what brush I use for edge highlighting, and it's an Army Painter Precise Detail brush. This little thing is my workhorse and I've had it for a while now and it's going very strong. Now, as you can probably see, the middle of the collar isn't painted and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with this guy. I was kind of umming and ahhing throughout the whole process of what color to paint this. So what I decided to do was tie it back to the squig theme and make it kind of like a squig leather or something like that. So I used the same colors that I used for the Gobbla to finish this. And after that was done, these two were finally complete. I did fix up a few little things here and there, like I always do, but anyway, here they are. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end, my dudes. And as I said earlier, yes, we now do have a Patreon. So if you're interested, click the link in the bio and sign up today. I'll be putting some additional content on the Patreon page, maybe a few videos each month, maybe some tutorials and stuff like that. All tiers of the Patreon will also gain access to our Discord. We're pretty lonely in there right now, so if you want to head on over and make us feel a little bit better, make sure you sign up. And if signing up for a Patreon isn't for you, that's absolutely fine. You can hit the like and the subscribe button, and that will support the channel enough. Now, I only signed the channel up to Patreon about a week ago, but one eagle-eyed viewer saw that I put the link for Patreon in the channel's bio and he signed up first. So this video is pretty much dedicated solely to him. So thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. You get a full credit spread just for you. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much about it. I'll see you all next time. Take it easy. Cheers.